Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for Direct Connection. Just 11 months till the Iowa caucuses help start the 2020 campaign. Maybe it's a coincidence, but Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is spending tonight in Iowa. On our program this evening, we'll be looking at the governor's national ambitions and Maryland politics in general. Joining us here in the studio is Malia Cromer, director of the Sarah T. Hughes Field Politics Center at Goucher College. Joining us by phone from Des Moines is Aaron Murphy, Des Moines bureau chief for the Courier newspaper and Lee Enterprises. And Aaron, if I can start with you. You were there for this meeting of the Governors Association today. Was Governor Hogan wearing like a sign, a button that said Hogan 2020 or anything?
No, he was not. In fact, he was very careful to make that clear when a group of reporters got a chance to talk to him, and also Democratic Governor Steve Bullock from Montana, who's also there. He was very careful to note that he was here for the National Governors Association event. He wasn't here to do any campaigning, but as someone wise once said many years ago, nobody comes to Iowa by accident, especially the year before a presidential election. So he talked about it a little bit when he faced questions from reporters, but he did his level best to make it clear that he was focused on the National Governors Association event.
And nothing personal, but it's like single digits there now, right? So if Mr. Hogan, I mean, if he were to signal in some way that he wants to meet some Iowa voters, is there a coffee shop, a diner, a hot dog cart that everybody goes to? What's the tell?
Yeah, that's one of the things. And first of all, I should just note it is double digits, but it's double digits in the negative with the windshield. That's how cold it is in Iowa right now. Yeah, there's always things like that. The coffee shop visits in town here to meet with, local connected people in the Iowa politics scenes. It sounds like Governor Hogan is not doing any of that this trip anyways. At least that's what he told. I asked that directly. Are you meeting with any other Iowa Republicans while you're here outside of this event? And he said that he was not, other than meeting with Governor Reynolds of Iowa, who is a Republican. So taking at his word, he said that he is not doing any of that on this trip.
Very good. Aaron Murphy joining us from Iowa. Sir, thank you for your time. Malia Cromer, as mentioned, joins us here in the studio. You're a follower of Maryland politics. What's Governor Hogan up to?
I think he's waiting to see if something really big comes out with the Mueller investigation and opens up a lane in the Republican primary.
So he's positioning himself to be near the lane.
Sure, he's not in the lane, but he's certainly adjacent to the lane. And I think it's a big distinction. So if something does happen, so we should be
polling on Hogan, consistently strong, very high approval rating. Has to be noted that he won re-election to the office of governor, which has not been done by a Republican in Maryland since the 1950s. At the same time, when you ask Marylanders, do you want to see Larry Hogan in the White House? What do they say?
Only about a third of them say they'd like to see a Larry Hogan run for president. But keep in mind, that's exactly what we see sort of nationwide. If you ask Republicans nationwide, about a third of them would like to see the president draw a challenger in the Republican Party, Republican primary, and if you ask Elizabeth Warren's home state, Massachusetts, should Elizabeth Warren run for president? About a third of the Massachusetts voters say Elizabeth Warren should run for president. So it's a really consistent number that we've actually seen historically as well.
Let me bring in Todd Eberle, political science professor at St. Mary's College in Maryland. Todd joins us by Skype. And Todd, what do you make of all this? How does it play for Hogan nationally? How does it play here in Maryland?
Well, I think nationally, Hogan is doing what he needs to do, and that is he's not declaring that he's challenging Donald Trump. That makes him quite distinct from someone like John Kasich or William Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts. Those folks are going to anger Trump supporters. Hogan is waiting to see if something truly jeopardizes Trump's reelection bid. And if it does, he's positioned and ready to sort of step in without having alienated that base. So from that perspective, it's smart. In Maryland, however, we do know from recent history that Martin O'Malley was very interested in national politics. He had positioned himself to potentially run. He was traveling a lot and out of state. And I think that by the time his term was over, among many voters, there was sort of a resentment that he was focusing so much on his national ambitions and not as much on the state. So there's a cautionary tale there.
There hasn't been a Republican who did as well politically in Maryland back to Senator Mac Mathias, which was a long time ago. Talk a little, Malia first, about Hogan's appeal. Like, what does he know? Did he come to office, come to the campaign fully formed, knowing this is how I need to be?
I certainly think he had those sort of a good feel of the Maryland electorate. Hogan famously is somebody who really relies on public opinion polling to get a feel of what's going on. But for Hogan, he became sort of this hope of the never Trump sort of resistance Republican movement, I think for several different reasons. The first of which is just the contrast that he draws against the President of the United States. Very different men in terms of personality-wise. And the biggest one is that Trump really governs or gains his political power from a very narrow, very white Republican base. Larry Hogan, in the last election cycle, was able to demonstrate, I think, to Republicans nationwide, or those center-right Republicans, that he was able to govern by coalition, that he was able to attract people of color to vote for him, that he was able to attract independents and Democrats. And that's something that makes him unique, especially in the midst of that blue wave election.
Todd, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely right. Maryland is not the nation. And in Maryland, a Republican doesn't win by running to the base. A Republican wins by attracting moderate. That is something that statewide Republican candidates have had a real problem doing for several decades, actually. It's only been successful recently for Bob Ehrlich once, and then for Governor Hogan 4 years ago. And the circumstances sort of made it right for Hogan at that time. But if you're running nationally as a Republican, you've got to please the base of the party. So what he needed to do in Maryland is different from what he would have to do nationally, especially in a primary.
Let me remind our viewers, if you want to join the discussion, if you have a question for our experts on the Hogan possible presidential campaign, Maryland politics in general, give us a call. We'll have the number up on the screen. You can also email a question. The email address is livequestions@mpt.org. Malia, you made a point before we went on the air, similar to something Todd said, that Hogan has been careful to not be anti-Trump. He's doing something different. How did you describe it?
So Hogan is not anti-Trump. Hogan is un-Trump. And I think that distinction is important. I think this echoing sort of what Todd mentioned before, he wants to make sure that he's not going to anger the base, right? So if for some reason Trump has to drop out of a re-election bid, Hogan doesn't want to go into that primary bid by basically bashing the person that, by and large, Republicans really like a lot. So if you look at national public opinion polls, President Trump is really popular. He maintains that popularity among Republicans. It's been as high as 80% among Republicans. It's even among Republicans here in Maryland. It's strong among Republicans here in Maryland.
For people who think that there's no way, and living in Maryland with Trump having a 30% or something approval rating here, maybe we have a skewed view that recreating the electoral magic that got him elected in 16 is impossible, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. There is definitely a path for President Trump to gain re-election. That path is through the continued strong economy. If the economy stays strong, if he is able to at least try to limp through and not get any more sort of big, high-profile scandals, and it really depends a lot who the Democrats decide to nominate. If they nominate somebody who can really inspire their base or attract those sort of moderate, middle-of-the-road voters. But a lot of it does hinge on the economy. We know that presidents likely get reelected when the economy is strong.
And on the Democratic side, Todd, it's the casting call phase of the primary season. I think there's 15 people in. You have Biden on the sidelines. Bloomberg maybe gets in. What do you see out there?
Yeah, I mean, and the numbers are only going to grow. So the Democratic Party is going to have a huge number of potential candidates, folks who represent the moderate wing of the party, folks who represent the progressive wing of the party. And it's going to come down to where the passion is. If Democrats want to beat Trump, I still say they have to beat him from the middle, from the moderate wing of their party. But the passion may well push them more toward a more progressive liberal candidate. And if that's the case, it probably becomes easier for Donald Trump to recreate that electoral map. I mean, let's remember, the most recent head-to-head pollings showed Trump somewhere in the neighborhood of about 47, 48%. Democrats are polling at around 51%. That's essentially where the popular vote ended on election day, when Trump still was able to win the Electoral College.
But you can't beat somebody with nobody, isn't that the saying? So, but I mean, would the Democrats be well advised to run a plain vanilla nobody?
I'm not sure, and they're not going to be able to run a plain vanilla nobody. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm among that Democratic base. They're really looking for, I think, either a progressive champion or they're looking for somebody who has that magic sort of electability factor. And back to sort of the governor in all this. In a lot of ways, Governor Hogan is a much stronger general election candidate than he is a Republican primary candidate for those reasons, that he can appeal to a broad cross section of voters, whereas in the Republican Party, it is a little bit more monolithic.
All right, Hogan is also talking about a trip to New Hampshire without the cover of a National Governors Association event. How do you do it? Because at that point, it's more transparent what you're doing. Do you need to have some organization, or can you just show up?
So we're not sure, and I think that we're not sure to. I think in general, like thinking about what he'll be doing if he goes to New Hampshire. So what kind of events does he actually, will he be doing? He has an invitation to attend the, I think it's called Politics and Eggs, which is a very must-do, must-go event for any sort of possible presidential candidate. I still think that Governor Hogan is really very much wait and see what happens with the Mueller investigation, and wait and see if there's a huge shakeup on that Republican side.
And Todd, is he playing all this right? I mean, Malia tweeted in an interview today that the governor had given to CNBC. He's been on PBS, CBS. Have not seen him on the Weather Channel yet, but that could be coming. I mean, is he doing all the right stuff?
So far, he's playing it just right. He's continuing to tamp down the idea that he's running. He's saying, "Look, I haven't declared anything. I'm not running," but you've got to wait and see what happens, because there is the potential at least the potential that Donald Trump will not be running for re-election. So he's trying his best to avoid making Trump supporters angry, but at the same time making all the rounds that he needs to make, so that if it happens and he decides to run, there aren't many people out there saying, "Larry Hogan, who is that?"
Malia, let's talk Maryland politics for a little bit. You did a poll a few weeks ago now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, a couple weeks ago.
Seems longer. The key takeaway, a lot of progressive issues, strong support.
Yes, exactly. So the Fight for 15, really strong support across the board, particularly among those Democrats. It has now made it out of committee. It will get a vote on the chamber floor. Death with Dignity, or the Aid in Dying bill, we've demonstrated. I think there's a sizable amount of support for that as well. It will also get a vote on the chamber floor. We'll see what happens. That's a piece of legislation. I think anytime you have a morality politics sort of issue, you get a lot of sort of pushback. Even if it's a minority opinion, that's a really strongly held minority opinion. And so expect, I think, a lot of pushback on that piece of legislation.
Do you see anything in your years of polling Marylanders that shows evidence of this national polarization? I mean, there's a great, the Trump litmus test, I guess. Does it filter down to other issues?
I'm not really sure. I will say this, that the whole old adage that people say, oh, Maryland is the land of middle temperament, it's absolutely true, and it's been demonstrated over and over again by our public opinion numbers. The plurality of folks in the state identify themselves as moderates, and you can see this really interesting mix between sort of being economically almost conservative on some ways, like concerned about the increases of taxes, on the same time wanting to invest more in sort of public education and pushing these more sort of liberal policy issues, like, for example, the ban on styrofoam. You're not going to have that kind of legislation gain any traction in a more conservative state. But Maryland has, again, this really interesting mix of sort of sometimes fiscally conservative public policy mixed with, socially liberal, and taken together, it creates this really, I think, makes Maryland, I think, a little bit unique, at least from the rest of the country.
Todd, you've been studying this for a long time as well. Are we unique?
Are we unique, Maryland?
Of course we are.
Of course.
Yeah, I think that middle temperament actually does apply. I was talking about the Goucher poll with my Maryland politics class today. And one of the things that really jumped out at my students was the fact that much of the polarization that you see nationally isn't there in Maryland. Even on the series of questions that Goucher had asked about race relations, on the question, are things getting better, are things getting worse? My students were expecting to see white voters think that things are getting better, minority voters thinking things are getting worse. But in fact, white, minority, they both agreed that things are getting worse. I mean, that polarization isn't there. Maryland we're not a provincial state. I think it's because we're so close to the national game of politics. It makes us broaden our view beyond just what's happening in our borders.
Whenever I talk to a pollster these days, I like to ask, how do you get people on the phone? People are always suspicious of polls because I've never been called, they say. How's it going? Has it changed at all?
So response rates are always an issue with public opinion polls, particularly the last 10 years. I will say that the Goucher poll has the significant advantage that we're calling from a Maryland number with a Maryland student on the other end of the line. And
is that the first thing they say? Hi, I'm a student at Goucher College.
Absolutely. It's the very first thing they say. I mean, it's actually helped our response rate be a little bit higher than what we see on an average public opinion telephone poll nationwide. And the big thing is, I think, for us, too, we now mix in, we're about 77% of our sample now is drawn from cell phones. And so I think that methodology, really heavily cell phone, light on the landline now, I think gives us a really nice, accurate shot of what's going on in Maryland.
Let me get to one email question quickly. What are your thoughts on Hogan versus Pence in a primary? Supposedly they're friends or friendly.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Listen, I think that Pence certainly has more conservative bona fides that appeal to that particular base. But the question is, does Pence get damaged then? If the only possibility of a Hogan versus Pence is if Trump is then out of the race, and the only possibility of that happening is something. If he
probably take Pence with him, I guess.
If he goes down, and I think that the Pence will then bear some of that, either not maybe that responsibility, but some of that guilt by association that Hogan just won't have. And by the way, that's Hogan's advantage over a lot of other Republicans in the field if it opens up.
We're going to leave it there. Malia Cromer, Todd Eberly, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And Direct Connection continues right after this.
Are you turning 70 and a half this year? If so, you generally have to start spending down your retirement account. Even the minimum distribution can place you in a sticky situation. Luckily, you can now use your IRA to make tax-free gifts. Gifts up to $100,000 will never count as income, but always make a difference. That's icing on the cake.
Make your gift for this year before December 31st. Visit mpt.org/support.
This is a box that showed you a world beyond your own. It was just a box, but the world has changed, and so have we. And now the box can be almost any size or shape. And you decide what you want to explore. Anytime, any place. Break out of the box with PBS.
When the House of Delegates convenes at 8 o'clock tonight, it is not clear if Harford County Delegate Mary Ann Lisanti will be present. She is facing widespread calls for her resignation for the use of a racial slur. We spoke with reporter Ovita Wiggins of the Washington Post, who was first to report the story. Ovita, thank you for being with us. Is there anything new on this story today?
Well, as you probably know, she was not here on Friday during the session, so we'll wait and see whether she shows up this evening for the legislative session. There was a bill that she had introduced earlier that had a hearing today. She was not present for that hearing.
Can you clear up how the story developed? I mean, initially, I believe the first report was she said she did it, and then later on said that she didn't think she had used the N-word.
Right. I spoke to her about 3 weeks ago, asking her whether she said the word during this gathering at the cigar bar. She told me at the time that she could not remember whether she had said the word. During that interview, I also asked her whether she ever used the word, and that was when she told me that she was sure she had, that everyone has, and then compared it to using the F word or using the Lord's name in vain. After that, she had to meet with the Legislative Black Caucus. Actually called her to meet with them, asking for her to tell them what happened and to apologize. I talked to some of the folks in the Legislative Black Caucus who met with her. She apologized at that time, as well as the next day. She apologized to the Democratic caucus, and then she issued a public apology in which she said that she was sorry for the word coming out of her mouth, a word that she did not consider to be in her vocabulary, and she apologized at that time. After the House censured her on Thursday, she had a press conference with reporters in which she said that she, again, did not recall. That there was no evidence to show that she had actually used the word.
But there were some other people at this cigar bar.
That's correct. That's correct, including Delegate Jay Walker, who has said that she used the word. He was at a press conference on Friday with the Legislative Black Caucus and the NAACP and other groups that have come together calling for her resignation.
I don't think I've ever been to a cigar bar, to be honest. I mean, is it a bar? Is there alcohol? Because, I mean, so typically, I was going to say when somebody says something offensive, especially in a situation where alcohol is involved, they blame the alcohol, and head off for rehab or something.
Right. It's interesting because when I initially approached her 3 weeks ago, she said that she could not recall, but she also said that she couldn't remember much of that evening. The cigar bar, we actually, my colleague went to the cigar bar. It's the area in which the legislators were having their gathering is actually a lounge that's upstairs. It's sort of a bring your own. It's a BYOB, so I'm sure the alcohol was flowing. They're just meeting after hours, and I've never been to a cigar bar either.
Well, we'll make a date for that. So there are a bunch of strange things here. One of the odd things last week was there were sort of two rounds of punishment. On Tuesday, the House leadership pulled her leadership of a subcommittee, and then Thursday came back for the censure. What do we know about what happened behind the scenes?
Well, we do know that after the House Speaker pulled her subcommittee and her leadership position, that many people were upset and had then called for her to resign. The Senate leadership met with her privately a couple of times, asking her to resign. And basically said, we will likely move forward with the censure if you do not resign. And so obviously the House moved forward with the censure.
But having moved forward with the censure, they're out of ammunition, right? I mean, there's nothing else they can do to her short of expulsion.
That's right. That's right. And of course, the censure is a rare move that's taken by the legislative body, and expulsion obviously is something that is even more rarely used.
And there's no other recourse. I mean, so she was elected to a position for 4 years. It pays $55,000 a year, and all she would have to do is show up for 90-day sessions. I have no idea about her finances, but a strong financial incentive to keep showing up.
That's correct. I mean, despite all of the calls for her to resign, I mean, on Saturday, I understand that the Harford County Central Committee also called for her to resign. But as you said, it's really left up to her to decide what she's going to do moving forward.
Ovita Wiggins, great reporting at WashingtonPost.com and in the Washington Post. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thursday at this time on Your Money and Business, a century of goodwill. What will the next 100 years look like for one of the region's best-known nonprofits? Also, a revolutionary eye exam. We'll tell you more about that. Your Money and Business, Thursday at 7. Remember to join us Friday at this time for State Circle, the latest on Maryland politics, and you can see videos of all of our recent MPT programs. They are located at video.mpt.tv. Please follow us on Twitter. The Twitter address is @MPT News, and you can get updates on all of our local programs and our upcoming guests by visiting our main website, which is mpt.org. Now, for all of us here at MPT, I'm Jeff Salkin. Thanks for watching Direct Connection, and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.